Melanie Carter called her father at 2:49 a.m. 16 seconds of silence, a faint breath, and then nothing. By sunrise, she was gone without a trace. No signs of struggle, no goodbye, no clue where she went or why. She planned her meals, mapped out her weekends, and set daily goals. Her friends described her as responsible, organized, and a little too cautious at times. And only the soft hum of a nearby freeway broke the silence. From the outside, there were no signs that anything was wrong. The apartment was unusually neat, every surface wiped clean, no dishes in the sink, even the trash had been taken out. One odd detail stood out: her internet history had been recently cleared. Not entirely suspicious on its own, except for one phrase still visible in her browser's autocomplete: how to disappear without a trace. Investigators noted it, though they couldn't determine when the search had been typed. She had no history of mental illness, no criminal background, no history of substance abuse. She was, by all accounts, steady and grounded. People speculated online. Was it a cry for help? A signal? An accident? Some believed she had been taken, while others suggested she staged her own disappearance. But why would someone like Melanie do that? And that's what made it so strange. She left no trace, no note, no sign of struggle. And the question remained: what happened to Melanie Carter between 2:49 a.m. and 3:12 a.m.? He listened over and over, searching for a clue in the silence. Search dogs picked up a faint scent near the parking lot by Forest Park, but lost it quickly. Rain had already washed away most physical evidence. No signs of a struggle, no discarded items, no clothing, nothing. It was as if she had stepped out into the dark and simply dissolved. They didn't know if it was her curiosity, a part of her project research, or something far more intentional. There were no suspicious messages, no large cash withdrawals, and no travel bookings. The last transaction on her credit card was a $6 purchase from a convenience store made the previous evening. Her behavior that day was entirely normal. Her final text message, sent to her best friend at 10:38 p.m., was about a new series she planned to binge-watch over the weekend. The image showed her smiling softly, her dark hair pulled back, a subtle scar near her left eyebrow. It became a haunting symbol of a woman whose last known action was a silent phone call in the dead of night. There was no hint of fear, anxiety, or escape. A mug of tea, still sitting on the windowsill, was cold to the touch. Her laptop was open on the dining table, the screen asleep but still running. Her purse, keys, and phone were missing. Her wallet, strangely, was still inside a drawer in the kitchen, untouched. When she didn't respond to messages from her boss or a couple of friends, no one panicked immediately. It wasn't until she missed a 10 a.m. Zoom meeting and then didn't respond to calls the entire afternoon that someone called her father to check on her. By 6 p.m. that day, a welfare check had been requested, and 2 local officers arrived at her residence. It was a brief signal, then nothing. Her phone went dark. It hasn't been turned on or located since. That location remote, wooded, and unlit raised questions. Why would she go there at that hour? If she had left willingly, where did she go next? Then, at 2:49 a.m., her father, Gerald Carter, received a call from her number. He was asleep and barely registered the sound of his ringtone. Still groggy, he answered. What he heard was ... nothing, a soft breath, maybe. Security cameras in her building didn't record her leaving. A neighbor recalled hearing soft footsteps outside their door, around 3 a.m., but assumed it was just someone coming home late. Another reported hearing a car door close around the same time. These sounds, while possibly unrelated, were the only things that broke the otherwise silent night. A rustling noise, something like fabric or wind, but no words. The call lasted 16 seconds before it ended abruptly. Gerald blinked at the screen, confused. He assumed it was a pocket dial or a mistake and went back to sleep, unaware that this would be the last known communication from his daughter. At 31 years old, she lived alone in a modest second-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland. She wasn't married, had no children, and was known to keep a small but tight circle of friends. Melanie wasn't someone anyone expected to just disappear. What began as a simple missing persons report quickly unraveled into a chilling mystery of erased identities, hidden pasts, and a life meticulously dismantled piece by piece. Melanie had told her boss she'd be working late on a freelance assignment, something she often did to earn extra money. Her apartment lights were still on well past midnight. At 1:17 a.m., she sent a final email attaching a draft design to a client. There was nothing unusual in the message, no strange wording, no signs of stress or fear, just professional, as always. The truth behind Melanie S.'s disappearance would take investigators deep into a shadow she never spoke of, one she may have been running from all along. Melanie Carter had always been the kind of person who made lists. On the night of September 22nd, it rained lightly enough to slick the streets and make the streetlights shimmer. By 2 a.m., Melanie's neighborhood was quiet. Most of her neighbors were asleep. By sunrise, Melanie's apartment looked untouched. Her car was still in the garage. There were no signs of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside. Her windows were shut and her curtains drawn. When police began reviewing her computer, they found her design files open, exactly where she had left them. The next day, her disappearance was officially reported. A search of the area turned up nothing. The first real lead came from cell tower data. At 3:12 a.m., Melanie's phone pinged a tower about 3 miles away. Near the edge of Forest Park, her disappearance rattled everyone who knew her. Melanie wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. Police combed her social media, bank records, and recent contacts. As media coverage began to pick up, the public was drawn to the eerie nature of the call the 2:49 a.m. moment that marked the turning point. In the following days, volunteers joined law enforcement in searching nearby woods, hiking trails, and abandoned properties. Flyers with her photo were posted around the area. Despite the growing media attention, the investigation struggled. The evidence was sparse, the trail was cold. Her father kept replaying the voicemail left by the call, though it captured almost nothing. Just those 16 seconds of stillness. The officers who entered Melanie Carter's apartment on the evening of September 23rd couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not because the place looked chaotic or violent, quite the opposite. Everything inside appeared too calm, too still. Her bed was neatly made, the furniture untouched, and there was no sign of a struggle. It looked like someone had cleaned up carefully before leaving, or perhaps had never intended to come back. They moved slowly through each room, cataloging what they found. Her toothbrush was still damp. Her shoes were lined up by the door. Her laptop sat open on the dining table, where her freelance work was still on the screen. The tea mug on the windowsill had gathered a thin ring of residue. It was the kind of detail that made time feel real. She had been there. She had been in the middle of something. Then, in the middle of the night, everything stopped. The door was locked from the inside, with no sign of forced entry. Windows were latched shut. Her coat was still hanging in the hallway, untouched. The only things missing were her keys, her purse, and her phone. No fingerprints were found besides her own. No strange hairs, no foreign DNA. It was as if she had stepped out for a quick errand and simply never returned. Detectives questioned neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Most described Melanie as polite but quiet, someone who kept to herself and didn't bring much attention. One elderly neighbor on the ground floor said she sometimes saw Melanie carrying groceries and always said hello. Another neighbor, a young mother, remembered hearing soft footsteps on the stairs, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., followed by the faint sound of a car engine. At the time, she assumed it was someone going to work early. Surveillance footage from the apartment building didn't help. The front camera had been malfunctioning for over a week. The side alley camera caught only a single motion blur around 2:55 a.m. too distorted to identify anything clearly. It might have been Melanie or not. The timestamp lined up, but it offered no answers. Investigators turned to her digital footprint. Her laptop history showed she had been working until at least 1:20 a.m., then nothing. One peculiar detail remained the search phrase, "How to disappear without a trace." It stood out like a glowing signal. But investigators were cautious. People search strange things on the internet every day. It didn't necessarily mean intent. Still, the words lingered. Her phone records showed no outgoing calls except the one made to her father at 2:49 a.m., 16 seconds long, no words. Just silence, a slight breath, maybe a rustle, and then it ended. Her father didn't call back. He didn't think to. By the time the police accessed that data, Melanie had already been gone for more than 24 hours. The cell tower data placed her phone near Forest Park at 3:12 a.m. That area was dense, full of trails and trees, and hard to search thoroughly. It was also unlit at night, with only narrow paths winding through overgrown brush. Search teams combed through that section of the park with dogs, flashlights, and drones, but turned up nothing. No shoe prints, no clothing, no phone, no Melanie. The discovery of her car at home ruled out the possibility that she had driven herself. If she had gone to the park, someone else had to have taken her, or she had walked, which seemed unlikely that late and in the rain. And there was no evidence she had called a taxi or rideshare. Her bank account showed no transactions after the previous afternoon. Her credit cards weren't used. No cash withdrawals were made. Financially, she had simply stopped existing. Then there was the matter of the erased digital history. Not just her browser, but also her phone activity. Investigators learned she had disabled location sharing weeks before. She had cleared out her recent messages, both on her phone and her laptop, deleting old texts and email drafts. The cleanup seemed methodical, but to what end? Was she running from something or hiding from someone? Or was this part of something planned far in advance? Detectives visited her workplace and interviewed coworkers. Melanie had been considered reliable, professional, and low drama. No one could recall anything odd in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had made plans for the weekend. She had submitted assignments on time. One coworker recalled her saying she was ready for a quiet night in. That didn't sound like someone about to vanish. Family and friends were also interviewed. None of them reported anything suspicious, though a few mentioned that Melanie had seemed a bit more reserved in recent months. Her best friend said she had declined several social events and had recently stopped sharing her location, something they used to do casually for her safety. Melanie had told her she just needed more space. At the time, it didn't raise alarm. But as the days passed and there was still no sign of her, every little thing took on new weight. The canceled dinner. The sudden interest in self-help books. The conversations that now sounded more like farewells. People began to wonder if she had planned this all along. Rumors started circulating online. Some said she had been targeted by someone from her past. Others believed she was overwhelmed and chose to walk away. True crime forums picked up the case, dissecting every known fact. The 2:49 a.m. call became an obsession. Some users enhanced the audio, claiming they could hear a second voice. Others argued the breathy sound was a signal, not an accident. Theories spiraled: kidnapping, cult abduction, a staged disappearance. But the facts remained the same. Melanie Carter left no visible trail. No ransom demands were ever made. No one accessed her email or bank accounts after she vanished. No sightings could be confirmed. Just a brief signal from a phone near a park, a whisper of motion caught on a broken camera, and a cup of cold tea. The lack of any physical evidence frustrated investigators. There were no answers to chase, just dead ends. Her case remained active, but progress slowed. Without new leads or forensic breakthroughs, everything stalled. By the end of the second week, search efforts scaled back. Volunteers stopped showing up in large numbers. Her name began fading from headlines. The hope that she had simply walked away and might return was gradually replaced by something more unsettling. Perhaps she didn't leave on her own. Perhaps someone had made her disappear. And if that was true, it meant the most important question still had no answer. Why? As the investigation into Melanie Carter's disappearance entered its third week, the clean image of her life began to show cracks. From the outside, she had seemed like a woman in control, steady, quiet, responsible. While her bank activity had shown no transactions after the night she disappeared, something strange had occurred months earlier. 5 months before she vanished, she had withdrawn over $21,000 from a savings account she had never told her family about. The money wasn't transferred, it was pulled out in cash over a span of 2 weeks. Investigators couldn't find any large purchases or new accounts. The cash had simply disappeared. Melanie, then Emily, had acted as a whistleblower in a large corporate fraud scandal. The company she worked for had been manipulating marketing data to inflate their valuation. Her move to Oregon had coincided almost exactly with her name change. When questioned, he denied any knowledge of Melanie S.'s whereabouts and claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to her since the trial. He spoke of Melanie using her old name with a kind of disdain. He referred to her as that girl who got me locked up and said she had a flair for drama. Still, no hard evidence tied him to her vanishing. One former colleague recalled her growing more paranoid in the months before the trial. Hidden in a box of art supplies, they found an old notebook with random scribbles and half-torn pages. It turned out to be an abandoned cabin near a logging route, no electricity, no phone line. Inside were empty food containers, an old sleeping bag, and a prepaid phone charger still plugged into a solar panel. But one thing was now certain. Her life in Oregon had been a cover for something deeper, something unfinished. And somewhere, either in fear or in control, Melanie Carter or Emily Parsons had vanished into that silence with a story only she knew. The cabin had likely been used recently. But again, no sign of Melanie, no fingerprints, no phone. One page contained what looked like code words: back door, Silver House, Nevada lock, followed by an address in rural Montana. Another page was a list of names, all with question marks beside them, including her own old name. At the very bottom of the last page were the words, "If anything happens to me, it started back then." Melanie had mentioned strange cars parked near her apartment, receiving hang-up calls and seeing people she didn't recognize at her workplace. At the time, no one thought much of it. But with the benefit of hindsight, it seemed clear she had felt watched, possibly hunted. There were no messages, no sightings, no travel records showing he had been in Oregon. But the timing and her silence about her past cast a long shadow over everything. His alibi for the night of her disappearance was loose but not easily disprovable. The model matched Melanie's. The serial number confirmed it. It had been intentionally destroyed, likely by fire and water. Data recovery teams managed to salvage only fragments. Most content had been wiped. But there was one file left, a short video, 2 seconds long, showing nothing but a blurry shot of trees at night. No voice, no face, no time stump. Just 2 seconds of black and green shadows. He claimed he had been at home alone, watching television, no witnesses. No phone activity during those hours, just an empty apartment and his word. She had created an entirely new life, new address, new job, new social circle. On paper, she had done everything right to vanish from her former identity. Her testimony helped build a case against her former supervisor, a man named Jonas Bell, who served a prison sentence for wire fraud and obstruction of justice. Bell had made public statements during his sentencing, claiming that someone had set him up and promising to settle scores once released. But beneath the surface, detectives uncovered fragments of a life more complicated than it first appeared. With Melanie's connection to a federal case, her disappearance triggered broader investigative protocols. Federal agents combed through her old case files looking for names, threats, and overlooked connections. One name appeared multiple times in the case history: Ava Strickland, a former co-worker who had initially refused to testify and then disappeared herself in 2019, 2 months after the trial. Her disappearance had been ruled a probable suicide after her car was found near a river, but her body was never recovered. That case had gone cold. The truth, as it slowly began to emerge, didn't offer clarity. Instead, it raised more disturbing questions. Her texts became shorter. She declined invitations. She told friends she was restructuring her life, which sounded vague but harmless. Looking back, some of her friends admitted that her behavior had subtly changed: less laughter, more caution, frequent checking of windows and doors, almost like she was expecting something or someone. The first major lead came from a closer look into Melanie's financial records. When her father was informed, he was stunned. Melanie had never mentioned saving that kind of money. She had always been cautious with spending, often worrying about student loans and medical bills. There was no sign she had invested the money, given it to anyone, or stored it in a safe deposit box. She had legally changed it in 2017, 5 years before her disappearance. Her original name was Emily Parsons. That discovery shifted the investigation dramatically. With her old identity in hand, police traced her history to Las Vegas, Nevada, where she had worked for a tech marketing firm under her original name. It was as if she had prepared for something and then told no one. Around the same time, Melanie had also begun cutting back on social interactions. Digging deeper into her past, detectives discovered that Melanie Carter was not her birth name. She had been involved in a federal case, one that had flown mostly under the radar. He was released from federal prison 18 months before Melanie disappeared. This information sent shockwaves through the investigation. Melanie had never told her family or friends about this chapter of her life. Investigators reached out to Jonas Bell. He was now living in California, working as a freelance consultant. He didn't seem nervous during questioning. But there was something about his tone that left investigators uneasy. The FBI became involved at this point. Now, with Melanie missing, the possibility that the two incidents were connected grew stronger. Detectives began re-interviewing people from Melanie's past. In her Oregon apartment, they searched again, this time with more urgency. This notebook became the most important clue to date. Investigators sent a team to the Montana address listed. One more clue came a week later when a man walking his dog in Forest Park found something lodged between 2 rocks, a partially burned smartphone. By now, investigators were no longer sure if Melanie had run from something or someone, or if she had planned her escape to disappear entirely. The search for Melanie Carter no longer felt like a missing persons case. It had taken on the weight of something far more complex, more deliberate, and more chilling. Every lead uncovered a new layer of confusion. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, investigators found themselves chasing shadows. No solid suspect, no clear motive, just a trail of half-clues, empty spaces, and the haunting question, why would someone erase their life so precisely? The address in Montana continued to bother investigators. The remote cabin had been lived in, that much was obvious. Food wrappers dated just a week before its discovery sat in a trash bin. A blanket carried faint traces of lavender, the same scent used in Melanie's apartment. There was no electricity, but a makeshift solar panel on the roof powered a small battery pack, perfect for charging a phone or powering a lamp. A notebook left behind had been scorched and water damaged, but analysis showed several pages had been torn out deliberately. Investigators couldn't find fingerprints, but they did locate a single strand of hair caught in the blanket stitching. It was sent for DNA testing. 2 weeks later, the results confirmed what many feared and suspected. It was Melanie's. This revelation shifted the investigation into a new gear. She had been at the cabin, alive, possibly after her disappearance. The discovery ruled out immediate foul play. It also suggested that if she had been taken, she wasn't held against her will. There was no sign of restraint, no blood, no struggle. But if she had gone there on her own, it raised another terrifying possibility. She was hiding from someone. Or she was preparing to never come back. The FBI expanded the timeline. They re-examined Melanie's travel history and discovered something they had missed before. Months before she vanished, she had taken 2 weekend trips, one to Idaho and one to Colorado. Both were booked using prepaid debit cards under a fake name, and her phone had been turned off during each. They weren't vacations. Surveillance footage from a bus station showed her boarding with a single backpack and wearing a hoodie pulled low. In both cases, she returned 2 days later, never speaking of the trips to friends or family. Her actions painted the picture of someone staging their own erasure, buying supplies with cash, avoiding digital footprints, practicing travel routes. It was more than preparation, it was strategy. Yet there were contradictions. Melanie had signed a new lease just a month before disappearing. She had committed to a 6-month freelance contract and had updated her will, naming her father as beneficiary. She had even booked a dentist appointment 2 days after she vanished. If she had planned to disappear, why would she bother with routine responsibilities? Unless those very actions were a smokescreen meant to delay suspicion. The next discovery came by accident. A local man posted a blurry image to a regional hiking forum. He claimed it was a photo he took at a rest stop near the Columbia River Gorge. In the background of the photo, partially obscured, stood a woman who looked strikingly like Melanie. Her face was turned, but the features matched. The FBI enhanced the image and couldn't rule it out. More interesting was what she was wearing, a dark baseball cap with a barely visible logo belonging to a small outdoor shop in northern Washington. The shop confirmed someone matching her description had come in 2 months earlier and purchased camping gear with cash. By this point, investigators were torn. Some believed Melanie had run and was still alive, carefully crafting a new identity somewhere remote. Others feared she had trusted the wrong person, someone who helped her vanish and then turned on her. The threat of Jonas Bell still lingered in the background. While no evidence tied him to her vanishing, the timing of his release and Melanie's increased paranoia afterward was hard to ignore. A deeper dive into Bell's history uncovered reports of aggressive behavior, non-cooperation with parole officers, and several anonymous complaints from women he had contacted online. But without direct contact between him and Melanie in recent years, there was nothing actionable. Still, the FBI placed him under informal surveillance, watching for any signs of connection. They found none. Then came the strangest twist yet. A private investigator, hired independently by one of Melanie's friends, uncovered a P.O. box registered under the name L.C. Parsons in northern Utah. The name rang a bell. Parsons had been Melanie's original surname. The box had received regular mail for almost a year, with pickups continuing 2 months after her disappearance. Security footage was poor, but once again, the figure seen entering the post office bore resemblance to Melanie. Tall, slender, wearing a gray hoodie and dark sunglasses. She never spoke to anyone, never stayed long, and never left fingerprints. Inside the box were basic things: flyers, newsletters, junk mail, but also an envelope addressed to EC. with no return address. When opened, it contained only a single photograph, a picture of Melanie standing on a beach, smiling. No location details, no date stamp. Just her, looking straight at the camera? It couldn't be confirmed when the picture was taken. Analysts speculated it was within the last year based on environmental clues. There were no signs of duress. No signs she was being held captive. But the mystery deepened. If she was alive, why not reach out? Why not come home? And if someone else sent the image, what were they trying to prove? The case soon split the public into two camps. One believed Melanie had staged everything and started over. They pointed to the money, the erased history, the fake names, and the remote cabin. The other side believed she had been silenced, either forced into hiding or made to disappear by someone with resources, patience, and a personal grudge. A few people tied her to larger conspiracies, connecting her to unsolved cases of whistleblowers who had also vanished without explanation. Through all of it, Melanie's father waited. He refused to believe she was gone by choice. He insisted she would have never let him suffer like that. Every week, he checked his mailbox, hoping for another letter, another clue, but nothing came. The investigation remained open, leads dried up. But every now and then, a new report surfaced, a possible sighting, a vague tip, a mysterious online post. None could be confirmed. By the end of the year, the only thing certain was this. Melanie Carter had spent months erasing herself before she vanished. Whether it was out of fear, desperation, or determination, no one knew. And whether she had succeeded or whether someone else had finished the job remained one of the most chilling unanswered questions of the case. 8 months after Melanie Carter vanished, just as her name began to fade from public attention and the investigation turned cold, a small envelope arrived at her father's home. It bore no return address and was postmarked from a tiny rural town in Montana. There had been no word from Melanie in all this time. No ransom notes, no demands, no trace. Commentators debated whether the letter was a genuine message or a clever misdirection. Investigators were divided. Some believed it was a cry for help disguised as closure. Several people mentioned seeing a quiet woman who came into town for supplies once a month, always paying in cash, always alone. What if someone had forged it to end the search? An attempt to shut down attention, to convince her father and the authorities that she had left of her own free will? That idea chilled Gerald Carter more than anything else. They re-interviewed people from Melanie's past, revisited the cabin in Montana, and reanalyzed the video found on her burned phone. Melanie's case remained officially open, but it was quietly placed in the unsolved category. New leads slowed to a trickle. Her father, though devastated, kept her story alive. The receipt showed no loyalty card or tracking number. Once again, it was a ghost trail. Still, it gave Melanie's father renewed hope. He believed now more than ever that she was alive and choosing to stay hidden. He created a website with all the public information, hoping someone, somewhere, might recognize a detail and come forward. If she had truly chosen this path, then she had decided to cut off all ties not just from danger, but from the people who loved her. Friends tried to understand her silence, tried to accept that maybe she had found peace in some unknown corner of the world. He had memorized every curve of her handwriting. He still didn't understand. The last confirmed piece of evidence came from her own hand or someone claiming to be her. A woman with no criminal record, no enemies, and no public reason to vanish became a question that still haunts investigators, a question without an answer. But he whispered the same words every night before bed in case she could somehow hear him. "You are not forgotten." But there were always those lingering doubts. What if she hadn't left willingly? What if her words in the letter were not written under freedom, but under pressure? And then she disappeared into the night, leaving behind a locked door, a cold cup of tea, and a story that refuses to end. Gerald struggled with the idea that Melanie, who had once called him for advice nearly every day, now wouldn't allow even a single word. What had frightened her so deeply that she would give up everything to escape it? Gerald held a small memorial in her hometown, not a funeral, but a gathering. A vigil, friends, co-workers, and neighbors came. They lit candles and shared stories, speaking not of death but of uncertainty. The hope that one day Melanie would return or reach out again lingered in the air like mist. One analyst noticed a small detail in the 2-second clip, a flicker of light moving quickly across the screen, like the beam of a flashlight or a vehicle passing in the distance. Podcasts analyzed her movements, YouTubers dissected the timeline, Reddit users developed elaborate theories. Some believed she had discovered something she shouldn't have something related to her past, whistleblowing case, and had been forced underground. Others believed she had fallen into the hands of a group that helped people disappear, perhaps even against their will. A few romanticized her story, painting her as a woman who rejected the modern world to start fresh somewhere wild and free. But none of them knew the truth. By enhancing the footage and analyzing the angle, they estimated the presence of a second person nearby when the video was recorded. It wasn't conclusive, but it added weight to the idea that she hadn't been alone. Because if the letter was fake, then someone had gone to great lengths to stop people from looking for her. And that meant she might still be in danger. She was alone, wearing a hooded jacket and dark sunglasses, her posture tense. The timestamp placed her in the store for less than 3 minutes. She bought a bottle of water, some protein bars, and a pair of socks. She paid in cash and left quickly. Facial recognition software gave a 72% match, enough to raise eyebrows, not enough for certainty. Some said she drove an old gray pickup with out-of-state plates, but no one had a name. No one had a photograph. The woman kept to herself, and by the time agents arrived, she was already gone. Others thought it was exactly what it claimed to be, a farewell. Now this 8 months of silence, shattered by 24 words written in her handwriting. Law enforcement immediately took the letter into evidence. Handwriting analysis confirmed a strong match to Melanie. It had no surveillance cameras, no witnesses remembered anything unusual, and no other mail from that day matched Melanie's known writing. It was as if she had appeared, dropped the letter in the slot, and vanished again. If she was alive, she had been careful. No digital trace, no facial recognition hits, no financial activity. She was living off the grid, entirely disconnected. DNA testing on the envelope was inconclusive, partial prints smudged, likely from handling and transport. There was no usable trace evidence. Just the words themselves, cryptic and final. The handwriting on the front was familiar, almost unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper with a short handwritten note. It read, "I'm alive. I had to leave. You'll never understand why, and I can't come back. Please don't look for me. Just know I'm free now." It was signed with a simple initial M. Gerald Carter sat frozen, staring at the paper, his hands trembling. The note reignited media interest. Headlines speculated that Melanie was alive and living under a new identity. The small post office where the envelope had been mailed offered little help. The FBI pursued the Montana lead aggressively, searching cabins, remote communities, and interviewing locals. At the same time, another troubling theory emerged. What if the letter hadn't been written by Melanie? But there was no way to prove it either way. With no clear next step, investigators began re-examining earlier evidence. Despite their efforts, the trail once again went cold. Public interest faded, and so did active resources. And then something strange happened again 10 months after her disappearance. A security camera in a grocery store in a remote corner of Wyoming captured a woman who looked remarkably like Melanie. By the time investigators got to the store, the woman was long gone. No vehicle was seen. No one remembered her. That belief came with its own torment. Others close to Melanie began to move on, though her absence left an empty space that nothing quite filled. Online, her story remained a source of endless speculation. As the first anniversary of her disappearance approached, no new developments surfaced. At the end of the evening, Gerald stood alone with a candle, staring into the dark. He had read the letter dozens of times. Melanie Carter's case remains open but unsolved. She is still listed as a missing person. In the end, all that's known is this: at 2:49 a.m., Melanie Carter called her father.